and I am presenting what I believe to be an important, what I call greater community awareness and understanding about the people of Earth and our presence in a greater community full of intelligent life, and what our emergence into that greater community will mean for us and can mean for us, both the opportunities and the hazards involved in perhaps the greatest event in human history. And my background really is more as a minister. I left my work as a special ed teacher for the blind about almost 40 years ago, began to teach interguidance, had a personal revelation in 1982 which confronted me with the voice that had been counseling me both in my interguidance work and as a special educator. And that had a tremendous impact on altering the course of my life. And since then I have been receiving a vast body of teachings and insight commentary called The New Message. It's a new message for humanity. And a big part of that has to do with our encounter with this greater community of intelligent life, because that has a lot to do with why we are all here in the world at this time. But we as terrestrial dwellers do not yet have the wisdom, or nor the perspective, nor the insight enough yet to be able to comprehend this greater community sufficiently so that we as the native peoples of the world do not make the kind of critical errors that the native peoples in the past have made regarding their first contacts with explorers from beyond. I consider the voice of the voice, the primary voice, to be an angelic voice. And it was this angelic voice that began to speak to me in my work with blind children. Because anyone who works with the handicapped has to be able to develop certain kinds of intuitive skills. You can't go by the book if you're really going to teach young people how to be independent livers or live independently. And so this voice grew in scope and power for me to such a point that it began to give me curricula to teach. And I taught that curriculum, and I also studied it. I also made myself the first student of my work always. And this built up to such a point that I had an epiphany of my own, because certainly that voice isn't here simply to make you feel comfortable or to make you happy, but to ask you to do something significant and to engage you in serving the world beyond what you had considered to be possible or even preferable before. So this voice experience has grown into a major aspect of my life and certainly the source of my work. And it was this voice that asked me to receive the Allies of Humanity briefings from a group of observers, off-planet observers, who were witnessing the extraterrestrial intervention in our world and wanted to provide us wisdom about that intervention to equip us and forearm us and forewarn us of what that could mean for us. We have a real disadvantage in encountering this greater community, and so the Allies of Humanity briefings are here to impart greater community knowledge and wisdom to us so that we may have this contact experience from a position of power and authority and responsibility. But the angelic voice is the voice of the new message. It's the voice that has people in other countries and around the world. So it has been quite an inexplicable journey. So whenever anyone asks me about my life and how did you come into this, I'm always bewildered at how I'm going to answer such a thing. And I think you understand this, because anyone who is connected beneath the surface of the mind, what you could call the higher self or the deeper self, begins to live a much more inexplicable life. And I know many of your readers and viewers understand this and experience this, as do the people who are gathered here today. The Allies of Humanity briefings are briefings from an extraterrestrial source. It's an authentic off-planet communication that I was asked to receive. And I should mention that when I was asked to receive this, I was very resistant to it. I just did not want to get involved in this arena called the extraterrestrial presence in the world. But before, in 1996, I was preparing Greater Community Spirituality, which is a very core book to the New Message teachings. And of course, it deals a great deal with the greater community, understanding God at the level of the greater community, understanding our association, our individual association with the universe full of intelligent life, what wisdom means there, the things that we do not yet understand in order to function there responsibly and effectively. And it was this voice that asked me to receive an off-planet source called the Allies of Humanity. And I finally relented because after a while, I mean, freedom is no choice in that sense. And that began the briefings, the transmission of the briefings. The first set of briefings happened in 2 stages over the course of 1 year, and the second set of briefings all happened within about just a few days. And the third set of briefings, which has not yet been published, most of it was received in 1 day, and then last February I received the final chapter to it. And there's a story behind the Allies which is pretty interesting because they're really operating as spies here in service to us because they represent free nations in our region of space. And freedom is rare in the universe, and particularly in our region of space. So we know from our worldly experience that free nations don't get along very well with unfree nations, and there's always a dissonance there and a difficulty. And so the world is now really being intervened by races who are here to take advantage of this world and of our position in this world. And the Allies' briefings warn us about this, that this is premature contact, that humanity is not ready for contact. We do not have the social cohesion, we do not have the worldly wisdom. We're not prepared for this kind of engagement with races who can be far more clever and effective than we are, and who can exert much more control over the mental environment, a reality that we're only just beginning to understand. And so the briefings are really here not only to warn us, but to encourage us. Because what I see in the world today is that individuals and groups of individuals are losing confidence, not only in themselves individually, but in human institutions, human leadership. And of course, we all have good reasons to doubt human leadership. But this erosion of confidence in ourselves and one another sets the stage for the kind of intervention that is occurring in the world today, which is not a military intervention. It's an intervention of persuasion and dissonance, and it's manifesting itself in different ways. And so it's very important for us, particularly for people who have a spiritual grounding, who are focused spiritually, because we can make some very critical mistakes in assuming that whatever happens to us is the right thing to happen to us. You've heard these kind of platitudes. We're right where we just need to be. God gives us whatever we need. We can handle whatever happens. These are the kind of ideas that can really get us in trouble in engaging with the complexity of life, even as it's manifesting in our world today. Well, I'll hold this in contrast to the experience of the angelic presence, which is a tremendous presence. In fact, for me, it was so tremendous that when I really was able to face it completely, it had a kind of devastating effect on my life. It wasn't a sweet and comforting kind of experience. It was more like being blasted by radiation, and it certainly created a shift in me. And so I hold that kind of experience, which is a tremendous experience presence. It'll fill the entire room. You can't think of anything else. You can't do anything else. I mean, it's overwhelming. And if you have not learned to recognize what it is, you might think it is a terrible thing that's happening to you. You might be terrified of it. So I've had a long runway in preparing to receive this kind of presence and to receive its communication. But the Allies, I did not meet them personally. They've never visited the planet. They've never been on the planet. And they make it very clear that the real allies of humanity are not here and will not come. And we can talk about why that is so from an ethical and practical standpoint. So my experience of the Allies was like hearing a voice on a very long distance call. No personality, no presence, something far, far away. Because they were far away. I mean, even positioned in our solar system discreetly as they were at the beginning, they were still very far away. And so this was a divine connection that is free of mechanical interference or interception. It is something we don't know how to create. I don't know if anyone knows how to create this. And so there could be no interference from the intervention itself and no interception. But for me, it was a very faint experience compared to the experience of the presence. So no dramatic meetings, didn't get on any spaceships, didn't travel around the galaxy. I didn't do anything like that. And yet the emphasis on my receiving this was so strong. And had that emphasis not been there, I'm sure I would have just dismissed it as an errant kind of experience or an annoyance. Or no, I don't want to do that. But it proved to be very important, and I recorded it in my voice, and then it was transcribed. But when I read the Allies of Humanity briefings, I know this is not coming from me. And I think especially notable in the Allies is the regard it has for humanity. A seeming regard that's much greater than I think most of us have for our own selves as a race.